Okay, we're connected. You may begin.
Good evening. I'm Richard Noble, and I serve as chair of the Licensed Psychology Advisory Committee of the Kansas Behavioral Sciences Regulatory Board. Today is Tuesday, the 11th of August, 2026, and I ask the members of the advisory committee to respond to a roll call to signify their presence at this open meeting, that is being conducted remotely by conference call and other electronic medium. Linda Heitzman Powell.
Present.
David Stevens is not going to be with us, and neither is Jennifer Fontaine. Daniel Garlock,
I'm here.
Matthew Goliker is not here yet. Jessica Hamilton, I see
I'm
you,
here.
and there you go. Edward Hunter,
Present.
Tiffany Johnson won't be with us this evening. Sarah Kirk,
Here.
Christopher Leonard,
Present.
Jay Middleton,
Here.
and Robert Twillman.
Present.
I note the following staff members are also present: David Fye
Here.
and Leslie Allen.
Here.
Next, David Fye will read a message concerning this meeting being held remotely.
Thank you, Richard. This is David Fye, Executive Director for the Behavioral Sciences Regulatory Board. Public comment allows the public to address the advisory committee about its concerns, but the Kansas Open Meeting Act, or COMA, does not require the advisory committee to provide public comment or answer questions from individuals. Individuals requesting to provide public comment could contact the executive director prior to the meeting by sending an email to david.fye@ks.gov. There will be no time for public comment, as no individuals requested time for public comment. Because we are conducting this public meeting remotely by conference call and other teleconference ability, I state for the record the following information. Public access to this meeting is being conducted by medium of interactive communication, allowing members of the public without cost to attend the meeting through the use of the conference call or by viewing the board's YouTube channel. While the meeting is conducted remotely, the requirements of the COMA are not suspended. Therefore, we will be conducting this meeting pursuant to the COMA. On June 30th, 2026, we sent notice of the advisory committee meeting to all individuals who had requested notice of such meetings. The notice was also posted on the board's website, ksbsrb.ks.gov. You may obtain a copy of the notice at that website. An agenda and other media material have been posted on the board's website and are available for review. You may also request a copy of the agenda specifically by sending an email to david.fye@ks.gov with the subject line request for the agenda, and it will be sent to you. The notice contains information for the conference call and YouTube channel, allowing members of the public to attend the meeting free of charge. If we have, the notice also states that if we have any technical issues during the meeting, you may contact the board office by sending an email to bsrb@ks.gov. A recording of the meeting will be available on the BSRB YouTube channel following the conclusion of the meeting by using the link to the meeting on the agenda. The conference call line is active. I did test it before we got started. There's no one currently on the line, but if I hear someone connect and introduce themselves, I will let you know.
Thank you very much. And this meeting is now called to order, and the advisory committee, will begin its discussion, of the first item on the agenda, which is to approve said agenda. And all have had a chance to look it over. I'll entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
Motion to approve the agenda.
Jay moves. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Chris seconds. Does anyone have any matters of discussion or changes that they would like to make to the agenda? Seeing none, all those that are in favor of approving tonight's agenda, please signify by saying aye.
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 All those opposed by the same. The motion carries. So I'll move us on to our next item on the agenda, which is the approval and the review of the minutes from our last meeting that was on the 9th of June, 2026. I'll take a motion to approve the minutes.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes.
I'll
So
second.
Ned moved and Jessica second. Is there any discussion or any changes that anyone would like to make to the minutes from our last meeting? Seeing none, all those that are in favor of approving the minutes from our last meeting, please do signify by saying aye.
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 All those opposed by the same. The motion carries and the minutes from our last meeting are approved. So I'll move us on to our executive director's report. Dave, please go ahead.
All right, thank you, Richard. So at each meeting, I try to provide some updates about BSRB operations, some legislative updates if there are any relevant to our professions that we regulate, and then keep you informed on items from recent board meetings. So we'll start with some general updates on operations. Basically, well, actually, let's start with the items from the previous board meeting. The board last met as a board in July, on July 20th. It was a week later than normal because the mid-year meeting for SIPAC, which Richard attended as the commissioner for Kansas, fell on the day of the usual board meeting, so the board postponed its meeting by a week. But there were a number of notable things from the last board meeting on July 20th. One thing that we have been trying to be good partners with other groups around the state this summer has been that there was a group called Acadia Healthcare that was interested in exploring some flexibilities in the student temporary addiction counselor license under the BSRB. This is a student temporary license that the BSRB had requested the creation of about 3 years ago, back during the 2023 legislative session. And the way that it is currently designed is it would be for individuals that are about halfway through the coursework that they would need to become a licensed addiction counselor at the bachelor's level. But under this student temporary license, someone would have 60 credit hours with an emphasis on addiction counseling or a related field. They would need to have an agreement with their school and also an employer who would be willing to employ them and supervise them as they continue to work while taking classes towards finishing up that coursework to become a licensed addiction counselor. And so the group Acadia Healthcare, like I had mentioned, they actually came to the Addiction Counseling Advisory Committee that met earlier this summer, and they had requested a change to that position. One thing that they had requested was a more defined scope of practice for individuals practicing under a student temporary license, and there were about 5 different areas that they had requested consideration of in terms of what a student temporary licensed addiction counselor could do. They had also suggested a change of elimination of a minimum age for individuals that were holding a student temporary license. Currently, the statutes require someone to be at least 20 years old to qualify for those types of student temporary licenses. And then there was also a recommended change. As I mentioned, someone right now would have to have 60 credit hours, and they recommended a change to drop that down to 18 hours instead. And so members of the Kansas Association of Addiction Professionals attended the Addiction Counseling Advisory Committee meetings as well, and expressed a strong concern about those proposed changes. And they felt that based on their comments they provided during those advisory committee meetings, that these proposed changes could endanger the public. And so they expressed their opposition to those changes. We also had representatives from the Kansas Association of Kansas Department for Aging and Disability Services, KDADS, attended the Addiction Counseling Advisory Committee meetings, and they presented some information about other professions in the behavioral health field, and such as case managers, peer support specialists, a lot of other types of professions as an alternative to licensed professions under the BSRB. And then representatives from the Board of Nursing attended those meetings as well, and they talked a little bit about the mental health technician program that is under the Board of Nursing that has been used at the state hospitals, and they're basically revitalizing that program in Wichita currently too. So the idea was to listen to the concerns by that healthcare provider, see if what they proposed would be something suitable that the board, whether the board would be supportive of that, or whether other groups would have concerns or be supportive. And then as another solution potentially for them was to provide more information on other possible careers or individuals that could assist with workforce demands. And so ultimately, the advisory committee did not recommend the changes brought forward by the representatives from Acadia Healthcare that had been forwarded to the board at that July 20th board meeting, and representatives from Acadia attended that as well, as did representatives of CAP, the Addiction Professional Group, as did representatives from KDADS, and ultimately they asked the board if the board would take a position on a proposed change. And after the different groups weighed in on that topic, the board decided not to support a change to the student addiction counselor program, but the board did resolve to continue working with those individuals from Acadia Healthcare to try to help them with their workforce needs, but as an alternative to the solution that they put forward. So during the legislative session earlier this year, those individuals from Acadia had introduced a bill. It was House Bill 2506. It would have created an apprentice addiction counselor license. So that was the first proposal earlier this year, but that bill really didn't go towards what they hoped to accomplish. And so that bill did not actually get a hearing, but we did resolve to work with those individuals towards maybe an alternate proposal. And that was the culmination of the meetings in the advisory committee, and then ultimately what went to the board. So I don't know what will happen after this. I know that the meetings this spring, the hope was to have an alternate proposal or a consensus proposal by the end of July. And so we will continue to work with representatives of Acadia and KDADS and the addiction professionals. And I realize that this is a different profession, but I think it is relevant to share this with each of the advisory committees because ultimately there is one board of the BSRB, and it's a composite board. And so we have representatives from the different professions and public members that come together. So I want you as an advisory committee to be informed about what other committees are discussing, some of the work they're doing, because we do want to be good partners for the different groups. And so I just wanted to let you know that was what was discussed in June. And then also there was a follow-up meeting of that advisory committee in July. And so if you are curious about learning more about that, there's information posted on the BSRB website. Those meetings are available on the YouTube channel, so feel free to go back and check out information. Also at the board meeting on July 20th, there were a few different yearly business items that the board takes care of. That was the first meeting after the start of the fiscal year. So one of the items was there was an election of board chair and vice chair, and the board reelected Dave Anderson to continue serving as chair and Laura Shaughnessy to continue serving as vice chair of the board. Also happy to announce that 3 board members were reappointed to a second term, and that includes our chair, Richard Nobles, and also Cynthia Schindel from the social work profession, and then Jim Kilmartin as well, a public member on the board. There was also a number of reappointments or appointments of new advisory committee members, some for the behavior analyst, master's level psychology, professional counseling, and social work committee. As you may recall, this committee, the membership was full, so there were no new members this year, but if there's openings next year, we'll put out a call and see if anyone would like to submit consideration to join the advisory committee. One of the other items the board talked about was possible changes to the BSRB investigation policy. So as we are continuing to grow as an agency, over the past 10 years, we've gone from overseeing about 12,000 permanent licenses to now over 17,200. And as more and more people are becoming licensed, just based on volume, we do have more and more complaints that are filed against practitioners. And so we are trying to explore some alternate ways in which we can become more efficient in the way that we are handling these, and that we are, having the board address some of these. So as a concept, what we brought to the board for consideration, we would like to see if the board could have some discussion on establishing some set parameters and delegating authority to staff, that if someone has, let's say, a minor violation in a certain area, potentially if there's a certain criteria that is met, and the board agrees to delegate authority to staff, then staff could move forward on that. Let's say, if someone had a very minor issue that was more of a technical nature, perhaps the board could delegate authority that in that situation there would be a warning letter. And then that way we would be able to move those items forward. Or potentially, there's also something that is called a consent docket in other states, which would be basically some things in place that If someone meets certain criteria, perhaps the board could make them an offer of a proposal to move forward and have it be resolved right away. Alternatively, someone could choose to go to the complaint review committee through the traditional process. But we're trying to learn from other states. We're trying to get more creative in terms of moving different things forward. We're also going to be looking more about individuals that have had no previous complaints or previous violations. We want to be mindful of that. And so the board was in agreement conceptually with starting to look at this, but the board wanted some additional time to try to think about the scenarios that might fit under this. So I just kind of wanted to let you know that there was a positive, I think it actually was a vote of the board at that meeting to in support of this conceptually. And then between that meeting and the next meeting, and probably later on this fall as well, the board will be considering different scenarios that perhaps could be delegated to staff to move forward, or other ones that we could have a standing offer if we see certain things that we could offer to individuals. So we are trying to make some positive changes in that area. Yeah, just want to let you know about that as well. The board's next meeting would usually be the second Monday of the month in September, but once a year, the board likes to hold an out-of-town planning meeting. They try to move this meeting around the state. The last few years, the board has held this meeting once a year, in person only, and it has been in Kansas City, in Wichita, in Lawrence, in Manhattan, and this year it'll be in Leavenworth. So that'll be starting Sunday evening, September 27th, and then all day on Monday, September 28th. And it'll be in a hotel conference room area. It is open to the public. We'll have that information on the website, so anybody who would like to attend in person is welcome to. But that is the one meeting per year that we don't broadcast on the YouTube channel, because based on where we move to, we have various amounts of technology that we can use. So that's an in-person only meeting, but anybody who wants to attend the meeting is welcome to if they want to. So moving next to some general updates. In terms of a legislative item, I did want you all to know, you may recall we went through all of the regulations for your profession and others, and we were looking to see if there were any recommended changes from the advisory committee. BSRB staff had also reviewed the regulations to see if staff would make any recommended changes, and the advisory committee did vote on a number of those. They were forwarded to the board, and the board recommended some of those changes as well. Once every 5 years, all state agencies now are on a rotation where we have to do a report on all of our regulations and submit that to the legislature for their review. And what we have to do on each of those regulations, which I believe we have about 160 or 170 of those, is we have to basically say, is each specific regulation necessary to implement state law? And is it, if it's not necessary, is it beneficial? And then what would be the impact if this was repealed? And so I worked going through each one of those regulations, and the work the advisory committees did was very helpful, because there were a handful of them that the board has recommended either revoking or making some significant changes to update the language or to strike certain provisions that are no longer necessary anymore. So I had good information for that report. It still was a massive report. It was about 20 pages long. Thankfully, it's only 5 years that we have to do it once every 5 years, but that was turned in to the legislature by the middle of July. And so I've heard back that it was received and reviewed. It's possible that I may be asked to speak to the Joint Committee on Administrative Rules and Regulations if they have any questions, but so far I have not been asked to do so. So I just wanted to let you know that your work was very appreciated, and it did help me out quite a bit when I was going through that report. Just touch on a couple more operations updates, and then I'll see if there's any questions. Basically, in terms of operations update, you may recall that over the last few years, we've been broadcasting meetings on the BSRB YouTube channel. I think now we're up to about 250 or 260 meetings in total that we've broadcast. We have thousands of views for our meetings. And it's been a really good tool. We've been able to promote that for individuals who are becoming licensed, who have an interest in learning about changes for the profession. When we talk to students about how to apply for licensure and how to be active in these professions, we talk to them about that as well. So that has been a really good resource. Leslie and I also, we do talk to groups of students, and we had a presentation just recently to some students in a night class. And so we're continuing to reach out to different groups. We had a conversation with representatives from Emporia State today. And yesterday we talked to some individuals of the Fort Hays State programs. So even though there's kind of a little bit of a lull, I know some of the school programs are starting up again very, very quickly, but we're trying to make sure that we have good communication. One thing that we're working on specifically right now is programs that perhaps may have a little bit of crossover. For some of the schools that, let's say, they have a psychology program, but they also have a counseling program. And sometimes we have individuals who attend one program and then may apply for licensure for both. And so we're really trying to talk to the representatives from those schools and just kind of get a clarification, what was the program designed to do? And what is their understanding? Because federal law does require schools to inform students what licenses they will meet the requirements for. But it's tricky because the universities don't actually award the licenses or make those determinations. So the federal law asks them to basically provide an assurance they don't have total control over. But we don't want there to be any surprises with students either. And so we want to make sure that if they intended it to be designed for one license, that we are also in agreement that these people will meet the standards for licensure. But also, if there's something where they're close or they might be able to take some supplemental courses, we want to be able to work with them so that they can have assurance to know what to provide to students. And then there's no surprises when they apply for licensure. So we're trying to make sure that we're of the same understanding while also respecting that the BSRB does not have authority to tell schools what they will put into their programs. Schools can design programs how they would want to do it. But if they do want to meet the standards for licensure, that's where we want to work together to make sure that we're accomplishing that goal together. So, but I think I'll go ahead and just end my report now and see if there's any questions from any members of the committee.
Any questions for Dave?
I do have a question, David. So if it's federal regulation that schools inform students that what license they qualify for upon completion, I just wonder how some schools can offer a program that, and then the students go through it and they think they're going to be able to sit and be licensed, and they really don't have all the credentials or all the academic coursework or contact hours that they need.
Yeah, it's a good point. So this is under Federal Regulation 34 CFR 668-43. And what it says specifically is any colleges receiving federal student aid must publicly and directly disclose whether their professional or vocational programs meet educational licensure or certification requirements in each U.S. state. But like I said, it's challenging because the interpretation of the statutes and regulations is reserved to the licensing bodies. So the programs have a responsibility under the law to tell their students where they will meet the license requirements, but they don't interpret those laws when someone applies for licensure. And when we have people apply for licensure, our statutes and regulations have a very clear path when someone comes from an accredited program. What gets complicated is if someone goes to a non-accredited program, because we have I would call it flexibility that we can evaluate what their education was to see if it's substantially equivalent. But that gets really tricky because we have program level requirements. We also have coursework level requirements. And unfortunately, there are some programs, and we see this sometimes with out-of-state programs, especially those that are non-accredited, where someone will have attended an out-of-state program. I don't know if they have received assurance from that program that they would meet our requirements or not, but they apply. And then when we go through the review process, we run into some issues. And so that's where we frequently see it. And it takes some additional time. We collect information from the schools using questionnaires. Sometimes we will actually hire outside experts and absorb that fee. as a courtesy for someone to go through and look at the syllabi to see, is this specific to the professions and does it meet, or what are they missing? But unfortunately, that does extend the time frame, and so it leads to a longer review process. And so what happens is some of those applicants get very angry at us because they think, I was told I could get a quick decision, and it's like, well, but you didn't go a traditional path, and we really are working hard to explore alternate options on your behalf, but that does take time.
Yeah.
So, Linda, here at KU, we have actually now a dedicated person in graduate studies that assembles, like, for example, if there's a change in state statute somewhere for licensure, and then they tell us that, we have to keep a list of all of those requirements and then be prepared to describe those to any student enrolled in our program. And I think we don't necessarily say we absolutely assure you you will meet this criteria, but rather we say we generally do what is expected to meet this criteria. Of course, we don't have any problems with people getting licensed, but as an accredited program, or at least
Right.
that's my experience. But some people are probably familiar with the lawsuit that just recently got, basically completed, where the University of Phoenix took a pretty big hit because it was basically telling their bachelor's level people they would get licensed in psychology, which didn't turn out to be true for them. So
Yeah, and it's those programs that I'm thinking of. It's like, you have a student that is all excited because they graduated and they think they're ready to get licensed. And then it's like, whoops, your program didn't meet the requirements of the Kansas Behavioral Sciences Regulatory Board. So is that something and might be a Leslie question, is that something we tell the university? Like, you need to check yourself, basically, and to ensure that what you're telling the students is accurate?
well, David's right, though. I mean, it's a federal, right now you have to be in compliance. I'm sure there's bad players out there, but the requirements have gone up significantly for what we have to report out, and what we have to track. So.
To
Yeah,
that
and
end, Sarah, does KU keep the regulations on hand for Kansas only, or is this for other states?
All states.
All states.
Yeah, so
Everybody was like
basically,
KU.
yeah. So we have to have available to everyone every single state's requirements. It's fairly easy now because actually they've done a much better job of assembling that website for folks that want to check every state and what their requirements are. So it's pretty easy to do. We just point them to that website so they can check it all. But we actually have to look at each, and so I get notified. I get 2 or 3. I don't know if this happens with Chris and Ned, but I get notified by a person that works here at KU, whenever a state alters their, like makes a change in their licensure requirements. And then I have to check that and see if we're meeting that, or if we're not, how might that person then achieve that standard for that state?
Okay. And secondly, if I might just add, I was not aware that there was a lawsuit that got adjudicated about this with respect to University of Phoenix. And you said that they
It was
were,
at the bachelor's level, yeah,
yeah,
because
at
they
the
were telling.
bachelor's level.
Yeah. It was just recently in the news. So
yeah, and our time is limited, but I think this is a really important topic, and so we want to be good partners with our schools. And Leslie and I frequently are making contacts with schools and doing presentations for students, but it kind of puts it into an awkward position if we hear that a school is providing assurances that someone's going to meet the standards for licensure, and then we get an application and we see, oh, well, this person is missing these classes, or these classes were taken under a different program. And so, yeah, so part of this was kind of coming to the same understanding of what are programs designed to accomplish, and then also, if they are not, in alignment with that, we can't tell a program you have to make changes, but we can basically provide a little bit of guidance that says, and when we're reviewing, we identify these areas where someone would need to take some follow-up courses. Or, a few years back, you may recall we changed things in the regulations for some of the professions in terms of the in-residence requirement. So some of the other professions, there was a previous language that said if you attended a non-accredited program, you had to have half of your classes at the physical location of the school. And now that can be met by synchronous video conferencing. And so that provided some increased flexibility, especially for some of the online programs. So we're trying to make some good updates and changes, but we're also trying to make sure that students don't have a surprise at the end of the process, especially
Right.
understanding the cost of education and how much time is put forward. We want to make sure that everybody's on the same page. So.
Thank you.
Any other questions for David with respect to his report? Well, thank you very much. We very much appreciate it. And I'll move us on to the next item of the agenda, and that's updates on the Association of State and Provincial Psychology Boards, and that goes back to David.
Well, Richard, I talked last time that the CEO for ASPPB, Dr. Marianne Bernetti Atwell, visited Kansas and provided some updates to the full board at the May board meeting. And ASPPB is one of the organizations we work with a lot. They assist regulatory boards that regulate psychologists. And so we did want to highlight a few things. Their annual meeting is coming up in October. So Richard and I will be attending that meeting. It's going to be starting around October 14th, and it'll go through that Sunday of that week. But just kind of wanted to highlight a couple different topics. They're going to be focusing on, the title of the conference this year is Crossroads of Regulation, Navigating the Highway of Public Protection. Some of the different sessions they're going to have at that meeting. There's a topic that's called the regulator as an artificial intelligence user. Can we use AI without undermining fairness? So bring back some notes from that session. There's going to be a session that's talking about sanctioning reference points, the Virginia process. I know Virginia is a state that has made a grid of disciplinary sanctions, and so I'm thinking they will probably reference that. Nevada is going to be having a session on a bachelor's level license for psychology. So I don't know a great deal about that, but I'll bring back some information about what they're doing out in Nevada. And then there's a state 48 take on behavior analyst regulation. So that may be more applicable to the behavior analyst, but that'll be good to hear of what's going on in the different states. And then there's one last that's focusing on discipline in the complaint process that is still being developed. So I know that I have been vocal in some of the association meetings recently that I'd like there to be more standardization, in terms of the disciplinary processes. And I've been working with the ASPPB Research Committee as we study different models from different states to see if we can make improvements. Unfortunately, we don't have the budget to bring on a lot more staff members to make changes when it comes to just increasing manpower. So we have to be making, efficiency changes. And part of that is studying other practices in other states and trying to see what we can bring to Kansas. And so just kind of to highlight a few things coming up at the ASPPB annual meeting, but we'll bring that back when we get back. So. Richard, did you have anything from ASPPB? I think you will be our official delegate at the annual meeting. But anything you wanted to comment on, or Linda as well from ASPPB?
No, we will have a lot more information to give to you all at our next advisory committee meeting.
They usually have quite a bit of information that's very interesting. That is, like when you see it happening in other states and you think, how can we put safeguards in our state to make sure stuff like that doesn't happen here? So it's a good meeting.
Any questions from members for David regarding ASPPB? Seeing none, I'll move us to our next item on the agenda, and that's an update on SIPAC. And I'm the commissioner for SIPAC, and we had our mid-year meeting on the 13th of July. And there were a number of things that were discussed there. One had to do with the jurisdictions that have signed on with SIPAC. There have been 7 new jurisdictions that have introduced legislation to become members of SIPAC. A few are awaiting signature from their governors so that they can become full members. We do have 3 new members that will be coming on within the next year and a half. So effective on the 20th of September will be Alaska. Iowa will be on board on the 1st of July 2027, and Louisiana will be on board, excuse me, the 1st of January 2028. That would bring us to 46 jurisdictions where SIPAC is active. In terms of just a couple of numbers from the number of people that have, excuse me, yes, the number of psychologists that have signed up for having a authorization to practice either via telehealth or in person. Here in Kansas, as of July 1, there were 145 psychologists that have authority to practice via telehealth, and there are 9 psychologists that are able to practice in person remotely. There have been almost 20,000 authorizations for telehealth across the United States, and there are 17,000 that are active. So there's a really good retention rate of about 85%, depending upon the year over the last several years of those who have maintained their authorization to practice either via telehealth or remotely. We also discussed the strategic plan that will be updated over the course of this. Well, actually, let me pull back a little bit. I just came from a meeting today with the Finance Committee, and I believe that there's going to be an ask to extend the strategic plan. It was supposed to end at the end of this year. It may be extended to end at the end of next year because of some things that we are doing for financial matters that I can also discuss a little bit nearer to the end of my report. We had guests come in speaking. So this is speaking of financial matters. We had guests come in to talk about the portfolio of investments that are being developed for SIPAC for sustainability matters. It was a really good presentation of the investment bankers that are going to be handling the portfolio for SIPAC, and SIPAC has I think, a really promising future when it comes to sustainability. We're looking to maybe augment the memorandum of understanding that SIPAC has with ASPPB. I won't get into the whole details and the nitty-gritty about that, but SIPAC is functionally related to ASPPB. It's a branch of it of sorts. I can talk more about that in detail offline, but if you have any questions, you can certainly ask those of me today. In terms of other matters that went on at the most recent SIPAC meeting, we voted on a rule change when it comes to state assessment fees. So each state is each state that's a member of SIPAC has to pay $10 per psychologist that has an authorization to practice within that state. So with Kansas, as an example, if there are 145 psychologists that have a authorization to practice via telehealth and 9 to practice in person elsewhere, that's about 155 psychologists, and that means that we are assessed a $1,550 fee essentially to SIPAC. We voted on capping the amount that each state is at most can charge to be $6,000, as well as we passed a rule to allow for there to be a an ability to change how much the state is assessed per year all the way down to $0. So that is something that could happen in the future where Kansas wouldn't necessarily be charged for the number of psychologists that are practicing with with an authorization either via telehealth or in person. The next meeting will be in November. That will be in, I get it mixed up because if ASPPB is in Nashville, this will be in Reno. So I will be representing us in Reno, Nevada, the week of, I believe, November 13th is when I will be there. So that is a very truncated version of a 7-hour meeting. If does anyone have any questions for me about anything that was discussed, or if you would like me to go into more detail about the finances, I'm also on the finance committee. We met today, and that's where we got information about the strategic plan potentially being extended. And we're also working on the annual budget for SIPAC. That isn't out quite yet. We will vote on that in November at the annual meeting. But if anyone has any questions about financial matters related to SIPAC or any logistical or administrative matters, I stand open for any questions. I know that I went a bit quickly. I will be sure to bring you all more information as time goes on. The annual meeting again is in November, and that's usually the December meeting when we meet is when I would have the most information as to what's going on with SIPAC, and I'll be sure to update you then. With that said, I'll move us on to our next item, and that is old business. The first of which has to do with a discussion on artificial intelligence. And I'll turn it back over to David so that we can frame our discussion. You're on mute.
I think that's the first time I've done that in a few months, so getting better at that. Yeah, ASPPB will have a session definitely dedicated to AI, so I'll have some updates to bring back to you. I really don't have a lot of news on AI, except I can tell you at a state level, there's been some work sort of kind of moving agencies towards using Copilot. I don't have a lot of information about that. I know it was going to be launched and then it was held off. And so I know that AI is being integrated into more and more things functionally. But in terms of news for the advisory committee, I really don't have a lot of news. I'll still keep an eye out for any articles, if there's anything that gets passed by different states. Feel free to share it with me and I'll forward it to the rest of the members of the committee. But I did want to kind of open it up in case any members had any comments or anything they wanted to share with the other members of the committee since the last time we talked about this topic.
Dave, I haven't had a chance to read it yet, but I just received the current issue of the Journal of Medical Regulation, which is put out by the Federation of State Medical Boards. And their entire issue is on the regulation of artificial intelligence. So if I find anything interesting in there, I'll be happy to pass that along to you.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds great.
Ned's aware of this, I know, but APIC and the kind of the body that governs internship applications, applicants are now required to make an attestation about their use of AI if they're applying for psychology internships.
What are they being asked to attest to exactly?
Whether they used it or not. And so there was a lot of, at least, and Ned, you might have more to say about this, but when I went, our APIC liaison, when I was at the training directors meeting, talked a lot about how internship directors perceived it negatively, that they thought a lot of folks last year were using AI and just creating materials that were not authentic. And so I think this was in response to that, to, I think in many ways, just discourage students from kind of just using AI indiscriminately. So one could declare that they used it, but I don't think that would be a very good idea. Nor do I think it probably is a good idea to use it indiscriminately in preparing materials. But
That's
Mhm.
interesting that that the students are doing attestations. I'm doing a journal review, a review for a journal currently, and the authors in their footnote acknowledged that that they used AI in order to help develop their manuscript, and disclosed it in the submission. So,
Yeah, I know that I'm hearing from my research colleagues also that it's becoming quite prominent when you're submitting to a journal to you have to make declarations regarding your use
yeah,
of AI.
yep, I saw that. So having students do it too is at least brings it to an awareness level that people are somebody somewhere's monitoring this, so I can't use it and call it my own without some kind of acknowledgement. So it's just interesting.
Sarah, this is very interesting. And when you say the creation of materials are used,
Hmm.
what might you be speaking of when
Yeah.
you say that?
And again, I would love to hear from people that are at internships because it's not very clear. I actually had students ask me that exact question, Richard, which is, what does that mean? So does that mean like if I just kind of tried to brainstorm some ideas, does that mean that I used AI, or was it that I used it to actually construct the verbiage? Do you see what I mean? And I think that, I mean, we do think about what's useful for our conversation. I think these are the kind of questions everybody asks, so yeah, how far do you drill down on what does that mean? And what I'm telling my students, and again, interested to hear from the internship directors, is I think you have to ask that question of yourself. So I think the safest bet is to use your own mind and your own writing, if that's what you're comfortable with. So, and to follow the instruction.
Yeah,
To
I
be
haven't
honest,
seen.
put
Oh,
a lot
I'll let
of,
you go ahead.
I was just going to say, I haven't put a lot of thought into it. I mean, I think probably we all use AI, or at least I certainly do. On an application, I I don't know. I haven't put enough thought into it to be able to formulate a real good response. Thanks for giving the prompt though to weigh in on it, Sarah.
I think I agree with you, Sarah. I think in an application we should be using our own words and ideas, but I could also see a student using it to say, give me a template for my CV.
Sure.
And
Sure.
that just feels different inherently to for, essay one, write me a draft of essay one. And like right now, anytime you do a Google search, unless you somehow turn it off, it's giving you AI as the first response.
Yep.
And so that's tricky with a maybe the blanket statement with APIC, but I haven't seen the statement yet personally. So
Yeah, I mean, if I never have to write a reference list on my own again, I'll be extremely happy because I hate doing that. And I don't feel like that probably is something that's necessary for me to generate, and make sure I find follow APA style for a reference list. But again, that's a gradient. And so I think, like I said, as we do kind of approach this, I think there's just going to be lots of gradients in terms of that decision making.
Chris, you bring up something I think that is germane to the discussions that we've been having about this topic when it comes to Google giving you the first response as being AI driven or AI derived. This matter of how, and I just lost my train of thought. And if I get back to it, I will let you know. It's been that kind of a day, so please bear with me. Anything else on AI? I know that we had been discussing different potential recommendations to give to the full board about what we might want to do in regulation with respect to AI. And I believe that we had ended our discussion last time with being in accordance with a number of the regulation or propositions from other advisory committees. And I think that there were some others that came up here uniquely that we may have wanted to return to in terms of discussing those out. Dave, you and I had a conversation about this in our preparatory meeting, and I did not write down unfortunately, I didn't write down the other particular one. Do you have it with you?
Yeah, so a lot of the advisory committees have kind of focused on three areas in terms of recommendations. The third is not, everyone is not entirely on board for the third, but I'll tell you kind of what the consensus has been for the first two, and then I'll highlight what some advisory committees have commented on for a third recommendation. The first, I think, as opposed to trying to regulate AI, which I'll just be direct. I think the BSRB is the wrong group to try to say what AI can do or not. We're just not big enough, and we don't have the authority. That may be a state level or a national or who knows. But I think our jurisdiction is over licensed professionals, and so what a lot of the advisory committees have focused on is if licensed professionals are using AI, how can we provide some understanding of their responsibilities? And one is a lot of the advisory committees have recommended some language being added to unprofessional conduct regulation that would basically say if you are using artificial intelligence, you are going to be using, or it would be unprofessional conduct to fail to use technology that would not preserve confidentiality. So I think part of it is responsible use of technology, making sure that you're not feeding in information into a system that the information is going to go somewhere that it shouldn't. So part of that is preserving confidentiality involving technology when you're using AI. The second is if you are using AI, if it's embedded in a lot of the stuff that you're doing when it comes to client care, that there would be informed consent that you would make sure that clients are aware that you're using AI. It doesn't mean that you have to inform clients on every usage of it. If you're using it for advertising purposes, if you're using it for something that has nothing to do with client care, that's kind of been where the separation has been. But if you're using AI for purposes involving client care, there would be an informed consent that would be expected. And then the third is some of the early advisory committees, when they made recommendations, they had recommended allowing individuals the opportunity to opt out if they didn't want AI to be used in their client care. One thing that your advisory committee talked about, and others have as well, as AI gets more and more integrated into different things, is that something that's even a feasible expectation? It would be great if it was an option, but if it is so embedded, is it reasonable to allow for individuals the opt out that if they don't want AI involved with their client care, they would have the ability to do that? So that, like I said, it's not uniform on that third element. And I think you had kind of discussed that as well at the last meeting. But those are the three main areas that have come up.
I've got a question regarding the first one. That feels like restating HIPAA, and I'm curious how the other committees have approached do you just wrap that into if you violate HIPAA, it's bad. If you do this, it violates HIPAA, which is bad.
Yeah, I mean, on one hand, HIPAA is more of a federal type thing, and so the BSRB usually we basically say we don't enforce HIPAA per se because it's more of a state versus federal expectation in a sense, but the broad idea is still the same. But part of it is kind of putting a spotlight on making sure people are mindful that this does specifically apply to instances where you're using artificial intelligence. So. Part of it could be just spotlighting it to make sure that people are mindful that it absolutely applies in those situations. They'll be thinking about it if they do use it.
Any other questions on this matter? So, David, with respect to the other advisory committees, a few have offered recommendations to the board, correct?
I think about 4 so far. Yep.
So half of the committees have made recommendations to the board. I would want to know from committee members if we feel like we are in a position where we would want to offer uh, recommendations to the board regarding regulatory changes from the Licensed Psychology Advisory Committee for regulating psychologists with respect to the use of artificial intelligence. How do members feel about the at least two of the three that have found uh, seemingly consensus, and those being the first two items that David discussed?
I would offer that I'm not sure that there's a reason not to.
Say that one more time, Matt. You broke up a little bit on my
Oh,
end.
sorry about that. I would offer that I'm not sure that there's a reason that we shouldn't basically agree with those two things if that's what we land on. Like I'm not sure that there's a reason to not add something.
Sure.
Yeah, I'm in pretty much full agreement. I actually also think one is good just because I think we need to be explicit in this time, just a little bit more. I think the only thing that gets me a little bit with two, and I don't think we need to be the space that maybe deliberates that, but like what is the definition of client care? And I know, David, you kind of gave some examples, but will the board be then creating a more more defined one, or is it going to keep it kind of loose for interpretation? And that's maybe just something I'm interested in knowing more of. But I completely agree with number two. It's just how are we defining that? Yeah.
That's a really good question. I don't know. I mean, I may be answering for David. I don't know if we would keep it either more broadly or if the board itself um, would take a hand in narrowing or codifying what client care might be. A third option could be, and Dave, please again, tell me if I'm going too far here. It could come back to this committee for us to make a decision as to what client care might entail. But David, I would defer to you on that.
Yeah, that's kind of it's kind of an art a little bit when it comes to some of that language because I'm thinking of, other regulations where they wanted to make sure that people were being mindful of a specific thing. I think there's a professional conduct regulation on professional practice for some of the professions that has explicitly said, advertising. But then some people said, oh, well, maybe this only relates to advertising and the other thing that is specifically highlighted because those are the only two things that were highlighted there. And so I think, I think part of the things the board has been going through right now and looking at language has been to say, was it intentional to try to limit it to those things specifically, or should it be reworded as including but not limited to, so like I said, it's kind of tricky because you do want a little bit of flexibility so you can evaluate everything looking at the totality of the circumstances. On the other hand, you don't want people to be in a situation to where they would have said, "Well, I had no idea this could be interpreted that way." And so I do think there could be some more specific language as it relates to what is client care, um, but that's kind of the reasons why sometimes those things are not completely tied down to specific language. You want to allow a little flexibility, but on the other hand, you don't want to leave it so vague that people don't know how to interpret it. So
It's like specifically with client care, is it considered client care if I'm giving a response to a client who I'm billing their insurance company for that service versus I have a chatbot on my website that links into frequently asked questions. Which one of those is client care? Or are they both client care? One is specific. I know the client that I'm giving the information to. The other one is generic, where anybody can go on there and ask a question. And hopefully it's from a curated response list. It's not going out to the whole web so it can hallucinate. But is it considered client care if it's generic like that? I mean,
Yeah, I think you're bringing up you all are bringing up some really good points, because people are, and we do want people to think about how this should be interpreted. So if it needs to be more explicit, or more detailed, that's definitely something that could be a more detailed recommendation to the board. Because right now the board has collected the input from the 4 advisory committees, but they have not had a discussion as a board yet in terms of kind of moving forward on a general position. So if you wanted to put forward some other language, I think that would be helpful.
I think for psychologists, there's also this matter that's unique to us in terms of psych testing and the degree to which we want to be specific about the discussion around psych testing as it relates to the use of AI, like that may be something that would be discussed here amongst us because we are, along with the master's level psychologists, we're the ones who engage in that type of report writing. And there are, as we have discussed in this meeting previously, the potential use of artificial intelligence in writing reports and how that can be in some ways it can be beneficial, and in other ways it could potentially be not beneficial and it could do harm, especially if reports aren't reviewed and those sorts of things.
Yeah, I wonder about because I'm thinking, along the same lines of what is client care. There's a difference between AI develops a transcript and writes my note versus I dictate a personal summary and then it writes my note, versus even thinking things like if I am stuck and need a consultation and somebody creates a cool consultation AI bot or something, patent pending. If that happens, I want credit for it. The testing administration. I almost wonder, like, with the fact that this is probably going to be a developing area for years potentially, you almost need loose framework, or else you're going to be rewriting it every 3 months when somebody comes up with something new. And I wonder if you can lump it into things like do no harm.
No, I think that's a really good point, especially the matter of AI being the the growth is not linear. The growth is exponential at this juncture, and we would be returning to the well pretty frequently if we made things increasingly ironclad or increasingly specific when it comes to AI. So I agree with that it probably needs to be pretty broad in terms of how we frame the parameters around AI usage, the regulations.
I mean, I guess I'm in agreement with that thought of making it broad because of how fast moving it is and how, I mean, AI is getting incorporated into grammar and spell checks very regularly. And so, and again, those things need to be HIPAA compliant. But I like this idea of kind of this hopefully a little more firm than just aspirational, but like consent, do no harm, and then until we can come up, I would like us to make some statement on it because I think it's important to do so, but keeping it a bit broad and flexible until, I mean, just getting our minds wrapped around where AI ends and begins is even and the different types of AI are even challenging. And so I agree with the testing sentiment. I think there's a whole slew, and we've talked about this in here before, a whole slew of testing concerns. And so, but I'm in agreement with one and two, even if we word those very broadly.
Dave, do we need a vote? Well, before I put the cart before the horse, we're leaving out number 3 because I think that there had been discussion in our last meeting about, do we want to even approach this matter of opting out, and how complicated that can be. And I think in light of this discussion, what we were just talking about, how with the exponential growth of AI, it could be the case that, it's August now. By February, there may be a health system that has integrated AI into its EHR or whatever, and there won't be the ability for a patient at such a site to opt out of the use of artificial intelligence. So I just wanted to remind us that there is this third matter, and we seem to be coming to a consensus around the first two. David, do we need a vote to send at least the first couple of regulation or proposed regulations to the board?
I think that would be helpful. Sometimes there's consensus, and that's certainly an option for you as well. But I think just given the desire maybe to have a little bit cleaner language or more specific language when it came to client care, at least on that second recommendation, I think it might be helpful to have a vote just to make sure that that's accurately reflected in the minutes, and we can make sure that the intention of the advisory committee does get carried forward to the board meeting too. So.
Great. No, thank you for that. And I'm wondering if we might take them one at a time, with that being said. So with the first one being, and I'll have you state what has, I don't know if you have something particularly written down, Dave, but I'll have you, if you would, maybe state the first one, and then we can move to the second.
Yeah, I don't have specific language written down, but I would say it would be a recommendation, and feel free to, someone could modify this, or if someone wants to jump in. But the components were that if a licensee is using artificial intelligence, it would be unprofessional conduct um, to violate confidentiality by not using technology responsibly. I think that's the component. It would be, I mean, we're not really saying like you should do this, because that is more aspirational, kind of what you might find in an ethics code for an association. The language really for unprofessional conduct is, failure to do certain things would lead to potential violations. So it's really kind of a failure to preserve confidentiality as it relates to using AI by not using, or by using technology irresponsibly, something like that.
And do I have a motion to approve the conceptual framework? That's how maybe we can frame it. Do I have a motion to approve the conceptual framework around the first recommendation with respect to regulation of AI, and that having to do with confidentiality and unprofessional conduct?
I'm not trying to be the devil's advocate, but I guess I'm being Matt, and I think actually maybe David from like a couple meetings ago. I don't understand why AI is special here because we all have to abide by engaging in confidential processes, with other forms of technology. So I'm just trying to that's what I'm trying to sort out here.
I'm kind of in agreement with you, Sarah, and Matt, and others maybe as well on that point. I'm not sure what it is adding exactly to make something explicit there. I think, psychologists are ultimately responsible for, maintaining confidentiality and which includes, how they utilize AI. I also have a little bit of difficulty with the unprofessional conduct because, I mean, HIPAA violations occur that is not unprofessional conduct. People make a mistake, for example, and so I'm not sure what that's adding.
That is, that's a very fair point where it's like an accidental breach of confidentiality is not treated as unprofessional conduct. Um, and there are, ways in which to address and remediate an accidental breach. I see exactly where you're coming from with that, Ned. I think that it may have been Chris who said that, or it may have been Matt, and please tell me if I'm wrong. Either way, that having it be salient in this time where there is such growth with AI could be helpful as a not necessarily reminder, but to place front and center that, if you're going to be engaging in the use of AI, that that information about clients need to be confidential. And I can't
I
remember
would
who said that.
offer, oh, sorry. I
Well,
would offer maybe a proposed, this is not an official proposal, but maybe the language is something along the lines of clinicians who utilize AI are expected to utilize it um, responsibly, ethically, with conscientiousness of doing no harm. I don't know, wordsmith that, but something that basically approaches that blanket, like, don't be an idiot and think about what you're using before you do it. Because I think there are things like there are AIs that are designed to sustain confidentiality. There are ones that do not sustain confidentiality that you could use with confidentiality. And there's probably ones out there that claim confidentiality and are absolutely going to eventually just give up on that. I think it's our job to be good consumers of what we're choosing to use and go, I'm going to read my BAAs and I'm going to make sure that this is doing what it's supposed to do because I'm responsible for that. When they get their data breach, that's not my fault because I read my BAA that said that they were going to control this.
There is an option here. I don't have specific language, but we're kind of working through this as a group, which is kind of fun. So for some of the unprofessional conduct regulations, there's the act itself, but there's some qualifying language because you got to think, if this does fall under unprofessional conduct, the only way the board would really become involved is if there was a complaint that was driven where the board is asked to evaluate and evaluate the circumstances here. What some of those unprofessional conduct standards has as a qualifier is basically, you have the act, and then sometimes it says that this was an intentional act by, the practitioner did this intentionally, or the practitioner did this recklessly, or so there can be some qualifying language, not just doing the act itself, but with some intentionality or some recklessness or something like that. because that might help kind of differentiate a little bit between all cases. I don't know if that muddies the water or if that helps, but um, I do think, we talked a little bit as a group as far as an accidental type thing versus an intentional type things. And so you can put some language in there. There are some that do have some language like that, or negligently doing something or recklessly, or, so.
Yeah, I like something along those lines, because the other thing that's jumping into my head is that I am not specifically aware of any research right now that can point to whether there are iatrogenic possibilities or lack of empirical validation. I just don't think that stuff exists, and so I think you're potentially going to skirt a line where all of a sudden people are going, well, that's not the right way to do that, which is different than it is malicious, it's harmful, it's irresponsible, right? And so because you can differentiate a 20-page psych report and a 3-page psych report, and those who write the 20-pagers think that this maybe is unethical because it doesn't give enough information, but there's no empirical validation to that. So that's more opinion rather than protecting harm.
Mhm.
And I think that clear to your question, David, that doesn't muddy the water for me, because as someone who sits on the complaint review committee, it's helpful to have those sorts of adjectives or adverbs added to the language so as to make a determination as to whether or not someone has engaged in unprofessional conduct. If they did it accidentally, I mean, that's one thing, depending upon the regulation or the potential violation. It's one thing that something accidentally happened. It's another thing that if proven, or if there is evidence to substantiate that somebody has done something recklessly or they have done something maliciously, like that's helpful in making an adjudication on whether or not there has been a violation of a regulation.
If you'd like, on this item, I could bring back some language for you using a few of these adjectives, and then you could kind of take a look at it, how it would look in print. Looking at some of these things like intentionally or recklessly or maliciously, or different kind of framing, so that way you can kind of decide more specifically what you'd like to send forward to the board if you still want to make a recommendation on this.
I think that could be helpful.
Okay.
I would like that wording as well. Sorry, I didn't mean to, if you're going to speak,
No,
but no,
please do.
I very much like that wording. I think that'd be very helpful. My concern is within a year or two, none of us will be able to turn on an electronic device or log onto the web without AI running somewhere with or without our knowledge. And so I like adding some sort of qualifiers to offer some sort of protection.
So that is recommendation number one. And that motion wasn't made, so we don't have to table anything, and Dave will get back to us with respect to wording. With respect to the second proposal to send, and that has to do with in or not, no, third is informed consent. No, that's opting out. The second is informed consent, correct, Dave?
Mhm.
And the conceptual framework around it would be that clients would, or patients or clients would need to be able to provide informed consent to use AI, that it would need to be available. Am I framing this correctly, Dave? I want to make sure.
Yeah, the general recommendation some of the other advisory committees had talked about was if you're using AI involved in client care, you would have a duty to make sure that's in your informed consent to the clients. And it sounded like in this group, there was a desire to unpack the term client care and really add some more specificity in terms of what would be the expectation. And so I'd be happy to kind of bring back some more or some different language as regard to client care, or if individuals in the committee have some proposals that could be helpful as well to bring that back.
I think this spoke to, or we spoke to this when it comes to keeping things a bit broad. And I would still speak to that sentiment, to keep what client care means to be a bit broad, but I would be open to reading and hearing any particulars or specifiers that we would want to put around client care.
I would add, as well as what constitutes AI in that context. I mean, we've been using AI since the 1980s anyway, and the interpretation of MMPIs actuarially, and we didn't inform our patients that we looked at the whatever the readout was, but we did, and then we wrote a report. So is that, did we fail to inform the patient or client, that we used AI?
And,
So
there are
I
different
think
types.
I think part of the challenge with the current AI climate is that it's generative and it can hallucinate. And so unless you're really diligent in reviewing what's being generated by AI, it could put something in there that's contraindicated for the well-being of the client. And you're not going to catch it unless you're doing your due diligence.
Yeah, I think the other thing for me is all the data that went into the MMPI report, generator and interpretations is data that was controlled, had IRBs, was
Right.
overseen. The AI data is just scraping the internet for whatever's popular, and you'll get stuff from Reddit forums, and that's just junk.
Yeah, and the other concern I have with modern AI is, and related to generative, is that previous AI systems have been effectively closed boxed systems. Like, you put them in their little box and that's where they stay. Modern AI systems can like replicate themselves and misbehave and share things that they shouldn't, and that's not science fiction anymore. Those things really happen, unlike previous AI. I mean, MMPI generative reports, it stays within its programming language. It doesn't try to break out. It doesn't try to sell people's information on its own. It doesn't do all these things that generative AI can potentially do.
So AI told me that there's three main types of AI. Generative AI, which is, creating text, images, code, or audio. Predictive AI, which forecasts trends using historical data, or agentic AI, which would execute multi-step tasks on its own. So I think we're mostly talking about generative AI, but we could be very specific in that. But then again, if we are specific, as AI continues to evolve, there will likely be other types of language we're using for AI in the future. So, but it's a very good question. What are we considering AI to be, and what we consider AI to be today may not be what we consider AI to be in the very near future. So.
Well,
Well,
this, if I might say, the second one, the predictive AI, like, if there's a clinician or a psychologist that's using, say, AI um, to inform treatment planning and to determine what a trend line might be given a particular course of intervention, just as an example, like that could be predictive AI, correct? From the definition that was supplied.
Mhm.
I will offer And I think this is kind of what I meant when I mentioned it earlier, that perhaps merging 1 and 2 into one kind of generalized statement saves some of the nitty gritty on it. And I think that would be things like part of responsible use of AI is informed use. And that way because I don't think, I'm not tech enough, but spell check feels like AI, and I haven't had that in my informed consent ever. But as I am drafting new informed consent, I am looking at things like what are all the ways we possibly are using it and dumping that in my informed consent. But I've also stated it broadly that it is utilized. These are things it can do, and talk to your clinician about utilization. Because I really think like that's again, we're going to get into the weeds on. You have to tell them when you use this. Well, what is this? And I think that's just going to keep changing.
How do folks feel about Matt's proposition here to combine the first and second one? And that wouldn't preclude you, Dave, I think, from providing or considering language that we could use if those two things were combined. But what do folks think about Matt's proposition here? I think that that makes sense. To me, at least, but I would want to hear from others.
The
I think
only thing,
responsible-
I mean, for me, sorry, Linda, is that there's basically pillars or domains, if you will, from the recommendations from the American Psychological Association for using AI in practice. And they just fall into categories. I would say they've used fairly broad language. So they use kind of AI use and, they describe it very broadly. And then also they just refer to it as psychological services. So again, very broad language, not drilling down much at all. But then there's kind of just each domain divided into transparency and informed consent, something we haven't talked about at all, which is mitigating bias and promoting equity. Data privacy and security is kind of the next pillar, accuracy and misinformation, and then human oversight and professional judgment, and then liability and ethical responsibility. And again, I think we could argue some of those could be combined. Some of them don't make as much sense to be combined. But I think it's reasonable to think about how those are described because they also, David, do use positive language. They don't necessarily say don't engage in reckless behaviors. They talk about engage in this behavior. And I think that kind of framing probably is a little more clear. Because if you get into a lot of don't do this or don't do this thing or in double negatives, then people get confused. So that's just my suggestion.
I really like the idea of pulling in, I mean, the work that's been done, like through APA. I mean, those are some really good areas to consider, and we're talking about some of them here. And I guess we're thinking about, do we want to also weigh in as have others? I mean, I'm not sure I completely agree with everything that APA has said so far, but at the same time, it seems like that could be a useful framework, if we're thinking about that going forward for endorsing something, that we might want to say to the board.
Sarah, how long is the report? Oh, you're on mute.
Sorry. The report is longer than the just kind of basic description of the pillars or the domains. But I would say not terribly long. Again, I don't think they've really, I think intentionally probably they haven't made it so long and onerous that they can't evolve, because I think as we're all recognizing it's going to. So it's really only 3 pages, it's several pages. It's quite brief.
So if that is the case, the reason why I asked about its length is because if members would be willing to read at least the pillars between now and our next meeting, and we can return to this at our next meeting, and Dave and I, we could read it more in depth before our next meeting. We could come back and hash out what we might want to offer as recommendations to the board when it comes to the regulation of AI. And Sarah, and I think to some others, I think that the point about how things are framed in a positive direction is great, I think. And for the purposes of regulation, I'm wondering if it does need, or if it seems to be needed, that it's framed as a do not do X or do not do Y for matters of regulation. Because it would be a proscription of behavior, it would be a negation of prescription of behaviors. It would be saying, you know what, you cannot engage in these behaviors because it would be unprofessional conduct. So I agree with the sentiment. It just may be the case that it would need to be framed in the direction of do not do X, or one shall do Y, unless lest you if you do engage in this, it's unprofessional conduct, or you must engage in this, and if you don't do it, it's unprofessional conduct.
One thing that I was thinking about, so for some of the professions, there is a unprofessional conduct regulation, and separately there is one that deals with record keeping. Sometimes it's even called unprofessional conduct as related to record keeping. And in that record keeping regulation, often it says basically failure to follow appropriate requirements as it relates to record keeping. And then below that, it would say, here are the appropriate requirements. And so it would lay those out in positive steps. And it would basically just say, here is the expectation. And if you just fail to do kind of what's listed below, you could have one negative at the top and then have the rest of them all sort of positive. And I think that would work too. So
And that is why you are the executive director, because that I did not know about all of the other professions in terms of way things are framed in their regulations. So I appreciate that.
And yeah,
I, I like that too very much. I think if you start saying, don't do this and don't do that, you say don't do A and don't do B, that leaves you 24 more letters, so I like that approach very much.
I would like that. I really like that the report was brought up, and I would prefer that our language stays kind of universal, knowing that some of us work in multidisciplinary groups, and so if social work has a different regulation for AI, and then we have that could just be a whole smorgasbord of problems. But I'm also interested in seeing where APA's ethic code comes out, and I don't know if anyone has a timeline on the new one and what that has maybe regarding um, AI and ethics. And then I really like that one pillar about human oversight and somehow making sure we get that into the regulations
Mm.
in a positive language way that if AI is involved, there's continual human oversight and checking.
I think we have a consensus to return to the next meeting, having examined at least the beginning. It sounds like it's Sarah, the beginning of the report that's like 3 or 4 pages that has the pillars. Is that what you were saying, or is the whole report just 3 pages?
The whole report is just 3 pages. And again, it's couched in recommendations for ethics, so it's not a legally binding document or anything like that. But I think it's a pretty good guide, and a good starting place, probably for framing language and domains of consideration.
Thank you for bringing it up. I really appreciate it, truly. And would folks be all right with reading that before our next meeting?
You can even get an AI summary if you don't want to read the 3 pages. So
Okay,
You
that
stole
was
my joke.
fun.
Just be sure to inform us that you've used it.
Well, let's do that, and we can come back at the October meeting and talk a little bit about what we've read and how we might want to consolidate things and how we might want to frame things given this framework that has been brought up. Again, thank you, Sarah, and thank you all for the discussion on this. Um, Dave, what I think I'd like to do, since it's 7:40, if we could skip B, um, and go to 8 and 9 and then return to B with time so that we can at least have this matter of new business brought up and decide as to whether or not we want to reschedule the next meeting.
Sounds great.
So if we go to 8, the new business that's on the agenda is to discuss potentially moving to quarterly meetings. And Dave, I will turn it over to you, and you and I have talked a little bit about this, and I could speak to it also, but please go ahead.
A few years back, maybe 2 or 3 years ago now, one of the advisory committees, the Addiction Counseling Advisory Committee, decided to start meeting quarterly. And so they have basically 4 meetings per year. And it has worked pretty well for that group when there is something that comes up. For example, the additional meeting working on that proposal for the licensed student temporary addiction counselor license. They were able to schedule a follow-up meeting for the group, but otherwise they meet 4 times a year, and so they moved to quarterly meetings. Recently, some of the other committees, we were looking at different things for the year, and we've kind of done a lot of heavy lifting over the last few years in terms of going through, drafting the surveys, doing the surveys of all licensees, reviewing the results. And then we went through all the regulations with different advisory committees. There's definitely still more ground for us to cover as an advisory committee, but some of the advisory committees have had some meetings that maybe lasted about an hour or so. And so they have started to have discussions about would it be better to have quarterly meetings, and then if something comes up that is more time sensitive, they could schedule additional meetings as needed. And so the Master's Level Psychology Advisory Committee has recently changed to quarterly. Some of the other advisory committees are having that conversation to see if it would be their preference. From the BSRB's perspective, either way is fine with us. If you'd like to continue to meet every other month, that's totally fine. If you'd like to move to quarterly, we can facilitate that too. So just whatever your preference is.
I had said to Dave and the meeting that we have before this meeting that um, with the matter of potentially changing the postdoc requirements still on the table, that may be it may be, and I would want to hear from other members. And it may be the case that we would still want to meet every other month until we have hashed out the recommendation on changing the postdoc requirement. But I would want for members to vocalize how they feel about moving to quarterly meetings irrespective of the postdoc requirement matter.
My initial preference, I just checked to see if I was muted. I am not. My preference is to keep it as is. To me, but not even taking into account the postdoc hours, but I want us to be able to be responsive in protecting the public. And that is not to say quarterly meetings, we couldn't do that, or if something came up, we couldn't, but I don't, I think every other month meetings helps us make us more responsive to public health, protecting the public. Also, I know we have this issue, but one issue I kind of still want to poke at is medical psychologists, which is going to be its whole. Yeah, and I'm aware there's so many moving parts with legislature. We have one tiny piece of that, but that in and of itself is just even broaching the topic is going to be a lot of work. And that's just, and me, I'm sure maybe other people don't, but I suspect other people here might have different things they would like to discuss and bring up. I say all that, if I still think, if we did go to quarterly meetings, could we still do those things? Absolutely. But it is just going to stretch that time out longer, which may be okay.
Which state just signed legislation allowing for prescription privileges just a couple of months
Hawaii, I
ago?
believe. I believe it's
Hawaii.
Yeah, it's Hawaii, Louisiana, and I worked alongside a lot of those folks. New Mexico, I think.
I believe that article said there are 9 now.
Yeah, Iowa, and then a few more. It's not a lot of states. It's not a lot of states.
David, I don't know if you have the data. I would assume you do somehow. But again, if I just kind of do an N of one, I know I've had to basically hit quarterly or maybe one above, one below, depending on the year because of just family, kid activities, various quality of life kind of issues. And I don't know how true that is for others. So I think maybe looking at some of that data, if we do have a lot of individuals that that's just kind of their predicament is they have to end up hitting quarterly, then maybe it just makes sense, for the whole body. Another compromise is I think, David, there have been some dates that fall at just very inopportune times or months where you end up maybe having a meeting that people just can't do or you can't get a quorum. So evaluating those times when it was very difficult to pull the meeting together. So maybe it's just not optimal to schedule it during that particular month. So those are two of my suggestions.
Yeah, sometimes I know when we get to December and things start getting really busy, sometimes those meetings get canceled. And that's totally fine. And sometimes a lot of our work as a committee is already wrapped up by that time. So
Yeah, December, if I'm remembering correctly, is often a month where it's either difficult to make quorum or we wind up postponing until January or something like that.
what's interesting is I have heard, because this is before my time, but I've heard that, most of the advisory committees used to meet in person for every meeting. And I'm very happy that we have Zoom technology. I hope that helps, with quorum, but having individuals drive all the way across the state at between 6 and 8 o'clock at night on a Tuesday evening, just happy we have Zoom. But yeah, whatever your preference is in terms of this discussion, like I said from at the beginning, we're happy to facilitate it. We just kind of want to, have this conversation with each of the advisory committees to see what their preference would be.
I would like to say, well, first, I got 12 minutes left on my computer and then it's going to kick me off. I got an automatic restart. So sorry, folks, when I leave early. But with that being said, I don't think we really end early very often. So I think there's always a pretty rich discussion and there's definitely conversations that we have that continue to get worked through. And so I think sometimes just having less sessions will just delay that process that we're trying to work through. But I also see what Sarah's saying. If we have certain months that never get quorum, should we go down one less meeting or should we just not use that month anymore? Because what does concern me is if we're working on something and we're like, well, we'll just schedule another one next month, that's less time for me to clear my calendar. Whereas I already have my calendar set for these meetings upcoming. So just being like, hey, let's just get an extra one in, I think would be difficult for us to get quorum with what we do professionally. So
I like Sarah's idea, Dave, if you have a sense of maybe the last year or last year and a half in terms of attendance, and looking to see if there are any patterns or anything like that. And I believe that's what Sarah is saying. Reporting out on that could be helpful in making a determination as to how we might want to proceed.
Okay. Yeah, I can pull that data.
So that was the item under new business, and we will return to that in October. And speaking of which, that gets to our next meeting on is slated to be on the 13th. However, the week before, or that same week, excuse me, is the week of the annual ASPPB meeting. And Dave and I had a discussion about, whether or not it would be feasible to pull off this meeting and the meeting with ASPPB. And Dave, I can turn it over to you to kind of summarize some of the things that we talked about, and I can chime in with my thoughts about this too.
Yeah, and it would be very challenging to go ahead and hold it on that date because so I'll be attending an administrator forum on the 14th, and then the remainder of the sessions after that on the 15th through the 18th. The travel day would basically be the 13th. So if travel went without any hiccups and I was able to land, potentially I could try to broadcast the meeting from a hotel room the evening of the 13th. The issue is I feel very confident about our ability to broadcast meetings here at the office. I feel less confident using my work phone as a hotspot, doing it remotely. So if it's okay with all of you, it would be a lot better. And this is also assuming that there's no travel delays or any kind of issue with the flights. If something would be delayed, I can't imagine trying to do this from inside of an airport. So if it's okay with you, it would be best if we could just move it to the following week, which would be Tuesday, October 20th. And so our proposal would be to kind of keep it on a Tuesday like normal, and then keep it from 6 to 8 like our traditional time, but just bump it out a week instead of doing it the 13th.
How do folks feel about moving it to the next Tuesday at 8?
Yeah,
Excuse
it
me,
works for
at
me.
6.
Works for
I
me.
would not be, sorry, I will not be in town. I will be at a conference the following week in Portugal, where I would be very unlikely to join.
Yes, you'd be what, 7 hours ahead, 6 hours ahead, something like that.
Yeah, I think it's 7.
I'll be at a conference, but that time of night, I think it's like a free night, so I could possibly make it, but I haven't looked at the full schedule yet.
There seemed to be some consensus that that would work. Unfortunately, Jessica would not be able to make it, and I hope you enjoy your time in Portugal and see wonderful things and have a great time at your conference. And Chris may not be able to make it because he will also be at his conference. Um, I would propose that we would go ahead and make it on the 20th. And if for folks who are able to make it, we can make it. And for folks who won't, we will absolutely keep you apprised of what was discussed. With that being said and settled, the last thing is the post-doc discussion. We've got 8 minutes left. I think what I'd like to do is actually give you all your time back. I usually don't say, have 8 full minutes, but because this is a very broad discussion and it will not be wrapped up in 10 minutes, I think that we can have a more fulsome discussion at our next meeting. So unless there is objection, if there's anyone who really would like to begin to dive into this discussion, I'm more than happy to do so.
Well, Richard, I would just make one request.
Yes.
I know we've discussed that topic in the past as sort of a way of preparing for the next meeting. There's a few different ways that you could discuss this as a group, but maybe members could be thinking of specific if there is interest in this, maybe be thinking of a specific proposal. In the past, we'd asked members to look at the regulation to see kind of what could be adjusted, or if you do have thoughts on some proposal, instead of talking about it abstractly or at a high level, maybe come to the meeting with a concept in mind that we can work with as a group, if there's interest in making a change.
Also, statute says that there has to be 2 years of supervised practice. So just eliminating the postdoc would not work. It would have to be a combination perhaps, because not everyone would have enough practicum hours and time spent in practicum to completely eliminate the postdoc. So it would probably be more of a, if you did so many hours in practicum, then you only have to do the remainder in postdoc. It doesn't have to be a full year, but there needs to be 2 years of practice.
How do folks feel about the proposition that Dave has made, and especially considering what Leslie has said in terms of maybe bringing something specific if there are particular changes that one would want to make in regulation to the postdoc, and if there are statutory things that folks see that I think is its own sort of bailiwick, but if we stick to kind of looking at the regulations, and possible changes with those, maybe bringing any specific proposals or changes that we might want to discuss. So we will do that for our next meeting, and that is to be held on Tuesday, the 20th of October, 2026 at 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. Any other thoughts or anything for the good of the order? Well, with that being said, I'll take a motion to adjourn our meeting this evening.
So moved.
And do I have a second? I didn't hear exactly who moved. I heard Linda and I heard another voice. Do I have a second? It was Bob.
I'll second.
All right. And I don't think that there is a need for a debate or a formal vote on that. I look forward to seeing all of you in just over 2 months from now. You all take care. Have a good rest of your evening.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.